I was just making my morning coffee, humming a little tune, when the call came about Grandpa Arthur's will reading. A normal, quiet moment, right? But then my sister, Audrey, showed up with these fancy lawyers, and everything felt wrong, like a cold, heavy cloud just rolled in, making me worry what would happen next with the entire estate. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I'd love to know. My mornings usually start with the smell of toast and a peaceful quiet, a routine I've loved since I was a little girl living with Grandpa Arthur. He raised me, you know? After Mom and Dad, well, after they were gone, Grandpa became my whole world. His house, a cozy old place with a big, rambling garden, was home. Every morning, he'd be in the kitchen, making his special oatmeal, whistling some old tune. I'd sit at the worn wooden table, sipping my juice, and we'd talk about everything and nothing. He taught me to bake his famous apple pie, how to fix a leaky faucet, and most importantly, how to listen. He'd say, "Elsie, sometimes the quietest things tell the biggest stories." I remember one sunny afternoon, just last summer, we were on the porch swing, and he was holding my hand. "You know, Pumpkin," he said, his voice soft, "this old place, it holds a lot of memories. Some things are more important than money, and some things need the right person to look after them." I didn't think much of it then, just a sweet grandpa talking, but now, looking back, those words hang heavy in my mind. Grandpa Arthur was like that, full of wisdom tucked into everyday moments. He loved simple things, his worn-out fishing hat, the way the light hit the old oak tree in the yard, and especially his grandkids. Audrey, my older sister, she was different. She always saw the bigger picture, the shiny parts. While I was happy helping Grandpa in the garden, getting my hands dirty, Audrey was always talking about investments, new cars, big houses. She'd visit, but it felt more like a quick stop on her busy schedule than a real visit. She'd bring expensive gifts, sure, but she rarely stayed long enough to hear Grandpa tell his fishing stories or watch the sunset with him. I loved her, of course, she's my sister, but our ways of being with Grandpa were just different. Then, 2 months ago, Grandpa Arthur passed away. It was peaceful, in his sleep, just like he always wanted. The grief was a heavy blanket, making everything feel blurry and distant. I spent those first few weeks just existing, wandering through the house, touching his old books, smelling his favorite pipe tobacco that still lingered in his study. The world felt emptier. We had the funeral, a small, quiet affair, just how he liked it. I cried a lot, but I also felt a deep sense of gratitude for all the years we had together. The call about the will reading came from Ms. Anya Sharma, a lovely, kind woman who had been Grandpa's lawyer for years. She said it would be a simple meeting at her office, just me and Audrey. I expected it to be a bit sad, a bit formal, but nothing too complicated. Grandpa wasn't a super rich man, just comfortable, with the house and some savings. I imagined he'd left us both something. Maybe the house would be shared, or maybe one of us would get it, and the other would get the money. Simple, right? I arrived at Ms. Sharma's office on Tuesday right on time. It was a small, neat office with lots of books and a big window overlooking a park. I took a deep breath, ready for whatever was coming. But when I walked in, I stopped. Audrey was already there, but she wasn't alone. She was sitting stiffly next to a man in a very expensive suit, Mr. Davies, and a woman who looked like his assistant, both with serious, closed-off faces. They looked like they'd just stepped out of a movie about high-stakes business deals, not a quiet family will reading. Audrey barely looked at me. "Elsie," she said, her voice cool, "this is Mr. Davies, my legal counsel." Legal counsel? My stomach dropped. Why would she need lawyers? It felt like a slap in the face. This was Grandpa's will, our family. It instantly made everything feel cold and formal, like I was suddenly on the other side of a courtroom, not in a room discussing our loving grandfather's final wishes. I felt a wave of humiliation wash over me. It was clear she expected a fight, expected me to be a problem, or maybe she just wanted to make sure she got everything she believed was hers. It was like she was saying, "You don't belong here, Elsie. This is serious business." Miss Sharma, bless her heart, looked a bit uncomfortable. Audrey, Mr. Davies, she said gently, I thought this would be a private family matter. Mr. Davies, a man with sharp eyes and a perfectly ironed shirt, just gave a tight smile. Miss Sharma, my client simply wishes to ensure all proceedings are handled with the utmost professional rigor and transparency. Rigor and transparency? It felt more like intimidation. I sat down, feeling small and out of place, clutching my handbag. My hands were shaking a little. I just wanted to be home, back in Grandpa's garden, away from these stern faces and this sudden, heavy tension. Miss Sharma cleared her throat and began reading. The words were formal, legal, and confusing. As she read, a knot formed in my chest. Grandpa's house, his savings, all the significant assets, they were largely designated to Audrey. My share was small, a modest sum and a few sentimental items. Not the antique pocket watch I loved, or the big oak desk he used for all his letters, but a small silver locket and a photo album. I mean, they were nice, don't get me wrong, but they felt like an afterthought, almost like a polite dismissal. It just didn't make sense. Grandpa and we had such a deep connection. He always told me, you understand things, Elsie, things other people miss. This will, it didn't reflect that at all. It didn't reflect the person I knew, the bond we shared, or the promises I thought he had made. I felt tears pricking my eyes, not for the money, but for the feeling that Grandpa, in his final act, had forgotten me or misunderstood our connection. It felt like a deep cut, a public humiliation of our quiet, loving bond. Audrey sat perfectly still, a hint of satisfaction on her face. Mr. Davies looked pleased, a slight, knowing smirk on his lips. I wanted to scream, to ask, why, Grandpa? Why? But the words wouldn't come. My throat felt tight. All I could think of were Grandpa's words on the porch swing, some things need the right person to look after them. And then another memory, fuzzier this one, of him saying something about signed letters, tucked away safe, just in case. But what did that mean? And where would they be? In that moment, surrounded by those cold, formal faces, I felt utterly alone, completely crushed, and deeply, truly humiliated. I knew then, with a sinking feeling, that something wasn't right, and I had to find out what it was. But how? And what was I even looking for? Leaving Ms. Sharma's office felt like walking out of a heavy fog into a harsher, colder light. My head was buzzing, and my stomach churned with a mixture of sadness and a quiet, simmering anger. Not at Grandpa, never at him, but at the situation. It felt like his memory, our shared history, had been twisted, misunderstood, or worse, deliberately ignored. Audrey's smug face, Mr. Davies's condescending glances, they replayed in my mind. The injustice burned. I kept hearing Grandpa's voice, Elsie, sometimes the quietest things tell the biggest stories. And then, that other whisper about signed letters. It was a tiny thread, barely there, but it was all I had. I went straight back to Grandpa's house. It was still filled with his things, his smell, his presence, but now it felt different, like a battleground instead of a sanctuary. Audrey and her lawyers were already moving fast. I knew they would be. They wanted to settle the estate quickly, which I understood meant getting their hands on the house and everything else before I could even catch my breath. They'd already sent a letter to Miss Sharma, requesting a timeline for possession. It felt clinical, brutal. The next day, I started my quiet hunt. Where would Grandpa hide something important? He wasn't one for big, obvious gestures. His secrets, if he had any, would be tucked away, hidden in plain sight. I started in his study, a room I knew so well. I looked through his old wooden desk, opening every drawer, feeling the smooth, polished wood. Nothing. Just old bills, letters from friends, silly doodles from when I was a kid. I went through his books, running my fingers over the spines, remembering him reading aloud to me by the fire. I pulled out every book, shaking it gently, looking for a loose page, a hidden compartment. Still nothing. The humiliation of the will reading still stung, fueling my determination. I wasn't looking for money anymore, not really. I was looking for proof of our bond, proof that Grandpa hadn't forgotten me, that he knew. Days turned into a blur of quiet searching. I cleaned the attic, organized his shed, Even went through the old photo albums again, hoping for a clue. Audrey called me once. "Elsie," she said, her voice airy, "Mr. Davies says you're still staying at the house. We need to start the valuation soon, you know? It's all very formal. We can help you find somewhere else, of course." It wasn't an offer of help, it was a subtle threat, a reminder that I was living on borrowed time in her property. The sting of her words only made me dig deeper. I hung up the phone, feeling that familiar knot of frustration and a renewed sense of urgency. One afternoon, sitting in Grandpa's favorite armchair, feeling completely defeated, I remembered something. Grandpa loved to write. He kept a small, worn leather-bound journal, not for daily events, but for his thoughts, his quiet observations. He called it his pondering book. He never let me read it, saying it was just for Grandpa's old brain. I'd searched the obvious places, his desk, his bedside table. But what if it was somewhere less obvious? I thought back to our conversations. He always said, "Elsie, look with your heart, not just your eyes." Where would his heart lead him to hide something precious? I closed my eyes, trying to picture him. He often sat by the old stone fireplace, poking at the embers. He'd tap his pipe against the mantelpiece. The mantelpiece. It was old, built into the wall, with an ornate, carved design. I'd always thought it was solid wood. I got up, my heart beating a little faster. I ran my hands over the cool, smooth wood, feeling for any imperfection, any seam. Nothing. Then I remembered him saying once, chuckling, "Sometimes the best hiding places are the ones you think are just there." I traced the carvings, feeling the grooves. My finger brushed against a small, almost invisible crack near the base of one of the carved pillars. It was so tiny I'd never noticed it before. I pressed gently. Nothing. I tried again, pressing harder, wiggling it slightly. And then, with a tiny, soft click, a small panel, no bigger than my hand, swung inward. My breath hitched. Inside, nestled in the dark space, was the worn leather journal. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. It wasn't the sign letters yet, but it was something. A step. A clue. I carefully opened the journal. The pages were filled with Grandpa's neat, slightly shaky handwriting. His thoughts, his ponderings. And then, towards the back, nestled between a pressed flower and a faded photograph of me as a toddler, was a single, neatly folded sheet of paper. It wasn't a formal document, but a handwritten note, dated just a few months before he passed. "My dearest Elsie," it read, "if you are reading this, it means you have found my ponderings. And if you have found my ponderings, you already know my heart. The will, as it stands, is a placeholder, a diversion. My true wishes, the ones that matter, the signed letters I spoke of, are with the one person I trust most to understand and honor them. Look to the quiet guardian of our memories, the place where our stories are truly kept safe." I read it again, my eyes blurring with tears. The quiet guardian of our memories. What did that mean? The house? The garden? Our photo albums? My mind reeled, but it was a good reel, a hopeful reel. This was proof. Proof that he had thought of me, that there was something more. The note gave me strength, a surge of defiant hope. Audrey's threats, the lawyers, they suddenly seemed less intimidating. Grandpa knew. He had a plan. This was the turning point. I had to find those letters for him. The crisis, though, wasn't over. A new letter arrived from Mr. Davies, more formal, more demanding. It stated that if I continued to occupy the premises and interfere with the estate's liquidation, they would be forced to seek a court order. It was a thinly veiled threat of eviction, of legal action. The deadline was tight, 3 days. I felt the familiar fear, the pressure, the doubt trying to creep back in. But I looked at Grandpa's note again. The quiet guardian of our memories. I knew I was close. I just had to decipher his last clue, and quickly, before they could take everything away. The threat from Mr. Davies hung over me like a thundercloud, but Grandpa's note, tucked safely in my pocket, felt like a warm stone of hope. The quiet guardian of our memories, the place where our stories are truly kept safe. I kept repeating it, turning it over and over in my mind. It wasn't the house itself, or his books, or the garden. It was something more, personal. Something we shared. Then it hit me. The old, dusty chest in the attic. Not a fancy chest, but a simple, wooden one that sat under the eaves. We called it the memory chest. Ever since I was a little girl, Grandpa and I would put things in there. My first lost tooth, his old war medals, drawings I'd made, letters he'd written to Grandma before she passed. It wasn't a place for valuables, but for things that held stories, things that meant something to us. It was the true guardian of our memories. I practically flew up to the attic. The air was still and thick with the smell of old wood and dust. The memory chest sat in its usual spot, looking unassuming. My hands trembled as I lifted the heavy lid. Inside, layers of our shared past unfolded, yellowed newspaper clippings, a seashell we found on a beach trip, my elementary school report cards, tied with a faded blue ribbon. I carefully lifted each item, feeling the weight of the memories. And then, at the very bottom, beneath everything else, wrapped in a linen cloth, I found it. A thick, legal-sized envelope. My name, Elsie Peterson, was written on it in Grandpa's familiar hand. Inside were not just one, but several signed letters. They were not just letters, though. They were official documents, dated 2 years ago, witnessed and notarized. There was a signed declaration of trust, outlining a specific plan for the estate, creating a family foundation with me as the managing trustee, and a detailed letter of instruction explaining why he had done this. He had carefully planned for Audrey to receive a substantial, but not controlling, inheritance from the initial will, while giving me the responsibility of managing the bulk of the estate, including the house, through the foundation. He wrote that he trusted me to use the resources to continue his quiet acts of kindness in the community, to maintain the spirit of the home, and to look after those less fortunate, just as he had. He had anticipated that Audrey's more ambitious nature might lead her to contest a direct transfer to me, so he had created a legal framework that would only be revealed if needed. This was his quiet revenge, not against Audrey, but against the assumption that wealth only meant personal gain. This was his true will, his legacy. Wait, what? I whispered to myself, the words feeling foreign in the quiet attic. He had planned all of this years ago. He knew Audrey's personality, and he knew mine. He had trusted me with something so profound. The humiliation I had felt just 2 days ago evaporated, replaced by a deep sense of understanding and fierce resolve. Grandpa Arthur truly was a genius. The follow-up meeting with Ms. Sharma and Mr. Davies was scheduled for 2 days later at Ms. Sharma's office. Audrey was there again with Mr. Davies, looking smug. She probably thought I was there to sign off on something, to meekly accept my small share and disappear. Her face wore a look of polite impatience. "So, Elsie," Mr. Davies said, his voice crisp, "are we ready to move forward with the probate process? I trust you've considered our previous correspondence regarding your continued occupancy of the property." I took a deep breath. "Yes, Mr. Davies," I said, my voice steady, surprising even myself. "I have considered it. And I have something that I believe clarifies the situation." I reached into my bag and quietly placed the thick envelope on Ms. Sharma's desk. Her eyes widened slightly as she saw my name, and then Grandpa's distinct handwriting. Audrey frowned, a flicker of irritation crossing her face. "What's that, Elsie?" she asked, her tone sharp. "More of Grandpa's old notes? This is a legal proceeding, not a sentimentality club." Miss Sharma carefully opened the envelope and began to read. As her eyes scanned the documents, her kind face slowly transformed from polite curiosity to genuine astonishment, then to a look of profound understanding. Mr. Davies, ever watchful, leaned forward, his confident demeanor beginning to waver. He cleared his throat. "Miss Sharma, if that is simply a personal letter, it holds no legal weight." Miss Sharma didn't respond to him directly. She finished reading, then looked up, her gaze falling on me, full of respect. "Mr. Davies," she said, her voice clear and firm, "these are not just personal letters. These are legally binding documents. A declaration of trust, dated and notarized 2 years ago, establishing the Arthur Peterson Community Legacy Foundation, with Ms. Elsie Peterson as the sole managing trustee. It explicitly outlines the distribution of the majority of Mr. Peterson's estate into this foundation, effective immediately upon his passing. Ms. Peterson, in her role as trustee, now controls the entire estate. The room went silent. Audrey's face drained of color, her mouth dropping open slightly. Mr. Davies, that perfectly composed man, froze. His eyes, usually so sharp and calculating, went wide, staring at the documents, then at me, then back at the documents. The color slowly left his face, leaving him looking ashen. He fumbled for his glasses, picked them up, put them on, took them off again. He was completely, utterly speechless. They had come in so confidently, so ready to dismiss me, to take what they thought was theirs. And now, seeing who actually controlled the entire estate, they were utterly stunned. Audrey finally found her voice, a strangled sound. "What? No, that's not possible. The will." "The will," Ms. Sharma explained calmly, "was indeed valid for the smaller bequests, including yours, Audrey. However, it was superseded by this trust, which was executed later and is fully legitimate. Grandpa Arthur was very meticulous, you see." I just sat there, quiet. Not gloating, not triumphant, but simply holding the truth. It wasn't about winning, it was about honoring Grandpa. Audrey tried to argue, her voice rising, but Mr. Davies, still visibly shaken, put a hand on her arm. "Audrey," he muttered, his voice hoarse, this changes everything. This is ironclad." In the days that followed, the lawyers, including Mr. Davies, had to carefully explain the new reality to Audrey. The Arthur Peterson Community Legacy Foundation now owned the house, the significant investments, everything. My role was to manage it, to ensure Grandpa's vision of community support and local betterment continued. Audrey received her inheritance from the will, exactly as stated, but she lost control of the larger estate, the power she had so clearly coveted. She tried to challenge it, of course, but the documents were undeniable. She eventually, reluctantly, accepted it, though her resentment simmered beneath a thin veneer of civility. I didn't just keep everything for myself. That wasn't Grandpa's intention, and it wasn't mine. I started working with Ms. Sharma to set up the foundation properly. We used some of the funds to establish a scholarship for local kids, just like Grandpa had always talked about. The house, our home, became a community hub, a place for local arts and crafts, a place for neighbors to gather. Grandpa Arthur, in his quiet way, had given me not just an estate, but a purpose. He taught me that true power isn't loud, it's the quiet strength of truth and the unwavering conviction of love. And that, I realized, was the greatest revenge of all. That day, I learned that true power isn't loud, it's quiet truth, just like Grandpa showed me. What's a quiet truth you've discovered lately?